Alrighty then. Here we are on the last day of public pre-order beta. Just a few hours left before beta closes forever. And so, wanted to take some time to answer maybe the biggest frequently asked question of all. And that is, will a particular build work or not? So, when somebody asks me, will their build work? They'll pitch an idea, and my answer is usually one of three things. A, yeah, that'll be really strong. That will delete the game. You'll be soaring through content. Possibly B, yeah, that sounds decent. Or C, that has a weakness with this, that, or the other. You might struggle with that. But the answer is never a flat-out no. And I've seen between closed beta and pre-order beta, people do all kinds of top-tier pinnacle content with all kinds of off-the-wall meme builds that, by any logic, should not have worked. So yeah, the answer is never no, that won't work. The answer is, at worst, you might struggle with something. So let's talk a little bit about what a build needs to do. Because when you think about it, you're sort of building a whole party into one character. And normally a party needs certain roles, like a tank, a healer, a damage dealer, etc. And that's true of any game. And in fact, I forget who presented this analogy, as they were talking about Holy Trinity design in games. And they said even sports end up boiling down to Holy Trinity setups. Like on a soccer team, or football if you're not American, you've got strikers up front who are like your damage dealers. You've got your goalkeeper in the back who's like your tank. And then you've got your midfielders between them who are like the support builds. So that's the Holy Trinity setup in an RPG right there. Tank, DPS, support. So there is no getting away from that on the conceptual level. It's just how games work. That does not mean, however, that you need to be compulsed to lock yourself into some kind of Holy Trinity team. Like I said, I've seen people do pinnacle content on the highest difficulty with, pure melee, pure caster, odd combinations of what on paper looks like nonsense, but they're able to make it work. Kind of like I've played here on public open beta some challenge builds. For example, we started with the 3-job fiesta, where we started with Paladin, and then we just rolled 2 jobs randomly, and I had to just play that. We ended up rolling Warrior and Rogue, It was not great. It was not optimal. I would not recommend that build, but I was able to make it work. But it definitely struggled with a number of things. So, one of the big things I want to touch on here is I want to get away from the idea of a meta build. Because meta is transient. Meta changes. Today, based on the current power level settings, job X is 1% more efficient at a thing than job Y, but 2 patches from now, maybe job X gets nerfed and job Y gets buffed, and that build that was slightly more efficient then is now slightly less efficient, or maybe job Z gets a new thing that opens up all kinds of avenues and, changes the calculus. Meta changes. So I don't care about meta. Because my goal here is for you to be able to logically assess the components of a build and do your own analysis and put those pieces of the puzzle together and come up with something that fits you. Because the single most important stat on any character is how much do you enjoy playing it. And now I know for some of you, that enjoyment just comes from figuring out what combination right now is 1% more efficient than everything else. I played a lot of Magic the Gathering back in the day. I am well acquainted with the Johnny Timmy Spike analogy. So I know there are definitely some of you out there who are Spikes. I know some of you are Timmys. Some of you are Johnnies. Personally, I tend to be like 80% Johnny, 20% Timmy. But that's me. So a character build that is fun for me might be completely boring to you, and that's okay. You don't have to play what I play. So, yeah, I want you to be able to play a character that you find enjoyable. But the freedom to play whatever you want comes with the responsibility to understand that some builds will be better at some things than other builds. That is the nature of the beast. Now, if you have to deal with 50 enemies at the same time, and you don't have some way to control that crowd, you're probably going to struggle. I won't say it's impossible, but I will say it's going to be harder than it would be if you had crowd control. Additionally, if you're dealing with enemies that just have metric tons of hit points, and you do 0 DPS, you might feel compulsed to leave auto attack on and go make a sandwich. While the enemy's HP bar very, very slowly inches its way down pixel by pixel by pixel. And that might not be your jam. I don't usually want to get up and make a sandwich in the middle of combat, but you know what? I've done it before. So, if you want to go full turtle mode, and I tend to be a very defensive player myself, if you want to go full turtle mode so you can just face tank the universe, that comes with that opportunity cost. That you may have to sit there and slog through a high HP enemy. And as opposed to a high damage output build that just blows it up, in like glass cannon mode. So remember, like the freedom to do what you want comes with the responsibility to accept the realities of what you have chosen. So yeah, let's kind of get into the pieces of this puzzle here, and figure any character needs to be able to do 2 things. One, it needs to reduce the enemy's hit points to 0, and it needs to prevent the enemy from doing that to them. This might seem like a bit of a John Madden statement, like, the team that scores more points is probably going to win the game. Thank you, John Madden. Very insightful. But yeah, I mean, those are the two things that you need to do. Don't die. Make the other guy die. And how you go about that is the whole fun of building out a character build. Whether it's here or on something like Path of Exile or in D&D or whatever. So, if we look at the classes that are available, let's go into the loadout screen here. So, on the subject of not dying, that probably means some combination of ability to get punched in the face, or ability to prevent yourself from getting punched in the face in the first place, or healing the damage that happens when you get punched in the face. So, for example, I always main Paladin, which should come as no surprise to anybody if you saw the name of the channel. If you were expecting me to play Shadow Knight, I don't know what to tell you. And Paladin comes with a nice mix of ability to get punched in the face and also recover the damage. The healing is, the lesser of those two halves on Paladin, as I've talked about in some other videos. But it's pretty good at getting punched in the face. Not as good at getting punched in the face as, say, the Warrior, who is just the best at that. Though, all kidding aside, I think actually the three main tank classes, Warrior, Paladin, Shadow Knight, are actually really well balanced against each other right now. They all do their job a little bit differently, so they'll synergize with other classes a little differently. But they get to the same point, I think, with a very similar overall amount of power. Likewise, the healers, or the true healers, cleric, druid, shaman, I think those are in a really good place right now. Cleric is the best at pure healing, but it is a one-trick pony. Druid brings a nice mix of offensive features that Cleric definitely does not have. Cleric nukes are not amazing for the most part, in terms of their damage output. But Druids are very solid, and their Flowering Heal line of spells is very good. Shaman, in addition to some pretty good heals, like the new Snails Healing line, for example, they also have the best slow in the game, which is the best debuff that exists in EverQuest. Making the enemy attack less means you take less damage. I know, John Madden moment, right? If the enemy doesn't do as many melee attacks, it's not going to do as much damage, so it's going to be easier for the players to win the game. Thank you, John Madden. Very insightful. In fact, I often joke that Togor's Insects, the top shaman slow, is actually itself the best heal in the game. And that Listless Deeds is the second best heal in the game, and Promised Renewal is actually the third best heal in the game. So, but going back to kind of the tank side of things for a second, some of the other classes available, for example, Monk. Monk is a really strong defensive class, despite on paper being a supposedly melee DPS class. Monk actually brings a lot to the table defensively, because first of all, it's got its ability Mend to recover 25% of your health on demand instantly every 90 seconds, or 50% of your health if it crits. But monk also has much higher uh, skill caps than most other classes for a lot of skills. Things like dodge and block in particular, it has a much higher cap than anybody else. So you'll negate hits a lot more often as a monk than you would as even a warrior. Likewise, monk has the highest dual wield skill cap in the game. So monks are just flat out better at using their offhand weapon than anybody, than anybody else in the game, and it's not even close. So I see a lot of people talking about like paladin, monk, enchanter as their starting kit. That will be a very, very strong build. But and then on the damage dealing side, I think most of the core damage dealers are all pretty in a pretty good spot relative to each other. You know, wizard has the biggest nukes compared to say magician, but magician has the pet to back it up. So the pet, you know, is always doing damage even if you run out of mana or even if you're doing other things. Necro has not as sturdy a pet, but a pet at all, and dots for sustained damage as well as life taps, things like that. You know, everybody really does bring something to the table here. And as I mentioned in a previous video also, if you held a gun to my head, though, and asked me what the strongest class in the game is, I would say Enchanter, and I wouldn't have to think twice about it. The ability to lock down crowds of mobs very, very efficiently and very, very consistently is huge, especially in places like Plane of Fear, where you're never fighting just one mob. You're always fighting 5 or 10 or more, depending on how aggressive your puller is. But one of the other things I ask people when somebody asks me, will XYZ build work? My immediate follow-up question is always, well, what are you trying to accomplish, and what, like, are you playing solo, or are you more of a group or raid-oriented player, or what's the, like, because playing solo is very different than playing with like, you know, a group of 4 people. And because as a solo player, you have to be able to keep all the plates spinning simultaneously by yourself. So you're usually forced into kind of a more generalist setup that is able to do some of everything. Because you have to do some of everything. You need to be able to do damage, at least some damage. You need to be able to survive. You need to be able to handle oddball situations. So you've got to have a pretty broad toolkit. In a group, you have the flexibility to be much more of a specialist because you've got other people that can handle those other roles. You could just go full Giga Tank, Warrior, Paladin, whatever, or Warrior, Shadow Knight, whatever. Just be the invincible turtle who does no damage but takes no damage because someone else could be the Giga DPS going like, you know, Monk, Rogue, Berserker or something like that. You know, the Destroyer of Worlds setup. You know, and then you can have other, you know, someone else just, you know, playing dedicated healer, you know, party play. So, you need to, when kind of putting your build together, you got to decide what or how do you want to play the game and what do you want to accomplish while playing. If you're more interested in just grinding XP mobs and maxing out AAs, things like that, that's a very different goal than saying, you know, I want to go solo all the pinnacle bosses as fast as possible. Those are very different objectives and different tools for different jobs. You know, for myself, my kind of main build is going to be Paladin, Cleric, Berserker. But you better believe that is not the build I will use for all the content in the game. There will be plenty of scenarios where, say, I need crowd control, so I'll swap in Enchanter. So, you know, how you're going to play and what you want to do is a big factor. And those are a lot of variables. And that really changes the answer to, is XYZ viable? So, let me actually talk a bit about my own build for a second here, and why it works, or what things is it not so good at. So first off, we have that Paladin base that is tied for second best tank in the game. So we've got the second best AC and HP of any class. And at the top level of gear currently available, Warrior will have about 20% more HP and AC than a Paladin or Shadow Knight. But that gap is much smaller at low to mid levels, when everybody is generally using the same gear. It's at the high levels, when you're getting into planar armor, where items become class specific, that Warrior pulls noticeably ahead in the tanking stat department. On the other hand, Paladin has a spellbook, unlike Warrior. A lot of those spells are not so great. Some of them are actively bad. Some of them are get your drinks ready, waste of ones and zeros, take a drink. But and a lot of them are hand-me-down cleric spells that are just 10 or 15 levels behind the curve, so they feel bad, but they're still head and shoulders above what a warrior would have. And Shadow Knight is in largely the same category of hand-me-downs that are not so great at the level you get them, or just some complete garbage off on the side that you wonder why anybody bothered designing it. But they've got some bangers, so it's fine. But then we add Cleric to this kit, and suddenly we have all the big boy heals. We have spells that are actually worth casting at the level you get them, that feel good. It's awesome. If you saw my deep dive video on Paladin and Cleric spells, then you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't watched that video, shameless self-plug here, maybe go watch that one. Because, one of those questions that inspired that video was, don't those two classes overlap a lot? And the answer is no, they actually don't. Also worth noting, by the way, that Cleric gets the best two-handed weapon in the game, the Baton of Sky. It is better than Fiery Avenger in every way. And on terms of pure weapon ratio, it is a hair behind the Berserker's Cudgel of the Fool, but it has a giant stack of stats that more than makes up for it. So then the one kind of downside, though, between Paladin and Cleric is neither of them really do damage for the most part. Paladin has Slay Undead to chew through undead trash mobs, but not every mob in the world is undead, and none of the pinnacle bosses in the game are undead. And I like fighting big boss mobs. I was a top level raider on vanilla EQ for much of my 13-year vanilla career. So yeah, big bosses is absolutely my jam. And my character really is designed to focus on that specifically. So yeah, the third part of the build then, Berserker, is our big source of offense. Berserker stance just turns you into a lawnmower by doubling your attack speed. So with a big fat two-hander, where normally you go, wait around, wait around, suddenly you're actually going and actually doing real damage, and it actually feels good. Though I will say, like, the one note, first of all, Berserker Stance currently is undergoing revision behind the scenes. So what Berserker Stance looks like on actual release a week from today, or maybe a patch or two after that, whenever it gets pushed through, is going to be somewhat different from what it is right now. So, do take that as a caveat. But I think the basic identity of the class is not going to change that much. Get good at swinging big fat two-handers around and just demolishing the world. Since Paladin also has access to a bunch of really good two-handers, like Fiery Avenger, and then Baton of the Sky, ultimately as the big endgame weapon, these three classes jive together really well. Also, as another point of synergy, Berserker Stance makes you damage yourself every hit, but it's a very small amount of damage. But it's more than 0. And Cleric has the Blessing of the Lord Commander line of spells that makes you heal every time you hit something. So those effectively cancel out. In fact, at the top level with an endgame weapon and the highest level Blessing of the Lord Commander itself, I actually found that I was healing for a little more than I was hitting myself for. So it was actually a slight net positive. But again, caveat, Berserker Stance is getting iterated on between now and eventually. And the big follow-up question then is this build I'm playing does not have slow on it. Or is it okay to not have slow? And in this case, yes. I did every Pinnacle boss just fine without slow, and it's the defensive power of Paladin and the healing power of Cleric. Just dealt with the damage. Would it have been easier with slow? Probably, but it was doable without. So yeah, even like difficulty 4 Kha'Zix Thul, I actually thought he was a total chump. I did difficulty 4 Kha'Zix solo on that build. Actually, before I did like difficulty 3 Inaruk. Now Inaruk did get nerfed somewhere in the middle of beta. In the middle of closed beta, or like actually towards the end of closed beta. And in his pre-nerf state, I could do D4 Kha'Zix. I could do D2 Inaruk. I needed more gear to be able to do higher levels of Inaruk because he hit so hard pre-nerf. He was the final boss of the game pre-nerf. Now, I'd say Inaruk is actually a bit more tame than Kha'Zix. But I would still say that Kha'Zix is honestly kind of a chump. I will still contend Draco Lich is the real final boss of Plane of Fear. Poor Kha'Zix is just not the final boss of his own zone. And also question, am I just rooting ads on the minis in D4? Nope, I just face tank them. I attempt to pacify stuff. D4 Plane of Fear, stuff usually aggroes before I even get in range to cast Pacify. I just face tank it. Yup, I just face tank it. Yeah. A full tank with cleric healing is very sturdy. Though other point of weakness though is this build does not have evasive stance. And evasive is, I would say, straight up better than defensive. Straight up better. It burns endurance a little bit faster, but its potency is so much higher because you reduce damage to almost 0. defensive cuts the damage, but um, yeah, it is worth noting, by the way, some of those boss kills that I was doing did require me to really keep my head in the game and actually manage stances, think about endurance, think about mana, and really manage my resources. And so, here's a point that I want to go back, that I want to kind of really lean on, is that if you want to play a very orthodox playstyle of walk up to the mob, whack it with your sword, have it whack you back, and take turns whacking each other, like a Final Fantasy battle where your dudes are in a line over here, their dudes are in a line over here, and you take turns going back and forth. You will probably, not necessarily, but probably need to have a somewhat orthodox build that covers tanking, healing, and damage, all to relatively decent degrees. If you want to play something really unorthodox, like, let's say, Warrior Rogue Berserker, and you want to do Pinnacle bosses solo with that build, you will probably have to come up with a very unorthodox way to do that, because that build has effectively no healing. Warrior regen is a thing. In Rubicite breastplate is a thing to give you some more regen. The Berserker's Plane of Sky chest item, Blood Runes, gives you more regen. If you wanted to like run around and kite Kha'Zix Thul while you regen back to full, you could certainly try. Actually, I know one fellow did do the big bosses on Warrior Monk. I forget if his third slot was. I think it was Berserker. So he basically would have to rely on regen and mend to stay alive. He did it. His playstyle was tremendously unorthodox, but he made it work. Or I've seen other people do full caster kills on those Pinnacle bosses, and they have to come up with novel ways of keeping their pet alive or chaining one pet into another as they die while keeping aggro off of themselves so their pet can do the tanking. Again, unorthodox playstyle if you want to make an unorthodox build. So, that is the price of a crazy meme build. The price of a meme build is a meme playstyle. Whereas on my Paladin Cleric Berserker setup, I can just grug mode my way through everything, just face tank everything, heal my way through it, while chewing through things with a big fat two-hander. Basically, in my mind, for my own like kind of class fantasy aesthetic, I've basically made a character that is just a paladin but better. Does all the things paladin tries to do, but actually succeeds at it. Just doubling down on what the class is already trying to do. Because that class fantasy aesthetic is a really important thing to me. That's a big part of the character, and that's a big thing that drives fun for me as a player. Like, I would never not main Paladin. It's in the channel name for a reason. I play Paladin on basically every game that allows me to play it. So, I love my goody two shoes white knight type characters. That's my class fantasy. But it doesn't have to be yours. And and as I said before, I want you to play the character you enjoy, and I want to try to hopefully give you the tools here to figure out how to play it effectively. And we're in a good state of general class balance where classes within a similar archetype achieve similar levels of total efficacy, even if they do it a little bit differently. That being said, though, the enchanter, not necessarily part of my aesthetic fantasy, but is a mechanical, let's call it necessity, or for, I don't want to say actually necessary, but strongly recommended for certain content. Again, where because the base build has very minimal crowd control, only doable via root or pacify, which are not always plausible. And so if I want to do that content, I will absolutely swap enchanter in so that I have the right tool for the job. It might take away from the aesthetics a little bit, but that to me, that's an acceptable price to pay for that in the right situations. So we got to balance aesthetics against actual gameplay mechanics, and find a happy medium there. So that's kind of my build that I'll be running, and another question here: wouldn't warrior, cleric, berserker work better? And the answer is warrior gets, as I said, about 20% more HP and AC, but it also does not have a mana bar. So this brings up an important point about how class resources are calculated. So your HP, your mana, and your endurance will take the 2 best of your current kit. So if you only have one class with a mana bar, then you have that class's normal mana value for being that class at that level. Likewise, if you have 3 classes with mana bars, you still only have 2 classes worth of mana. Similarly, your HP is going to go off the 2 highest HP values. So tanks are at the top, incasters are at the bottom, everybody else is somewhere in the middle. Gives you the 2 best of those. Endurance is the same way. Your 2 best classes will determine your endurance. As opposed to your AC soft cap is based on best 1 class of the 3. So if you have warrior in your kit, it's based on warrior. And things like attack are based on your skills, so it'll go off of the highest skill cap of any of your classes. So, for example, Monk has 270 skill in one-hand blunt and hand-to-hand, whereas other classes only have 250. So Monk will have higher attack stat if using those weapons than anybody else will. And, other thing to keep in mind is the general action economy. You can only be doing one thing at a time. Doesn't matter how many spells you have, you're only casting 1 spell at a time. You can't cast 2 spells simultaneously. Actually, bards have symphonic aura, so they can be casting, 6 spells at a time. Plus, they can, use melody and stuff to, weave, 4 more thongs together on top of their symphonic aura, so really they can be casting, 9 spells at a time. Yeah, I know how bards work. And yeah, so that's one of the things that actually makes bards so good. In early closed beta, there was a big meta for warrior, cleric, bard, and it is a really strong trio. I think it has since then lost a little bit of popularity as people have explored a wider range of options, but it really does work well because you take the best tank stats combined with the best healing and just a huge pile of support buffs from Bard, and you basically get a character that can heal forever because you regen so much mana via Mana Song that you can basically just turtle up and slowly grind through absolutely anything. So yeah, it absolutely works. But yeah, I think it has kind of fallen out of popularity, and this is another reason why like I don't care about meta, because what's popular today, is not necessarily what will be popular tomorrow once people find a new gimmick to utilize. Actually, to toot my own horn for a little bit, there was in closed beta a lot of people playing Paladin, Cleric, Berserker after they saw the kind of stuff I was able to accomplish with it. And to their credit, they had a lot of fun with it. So, and yeah, it warms my heart to see people playing my build, but by all means, go pursue your own aesthetic, play what you want, not what some random schmuck bag on the internet says. So let's go back to the loadout screen here for a second. So yeah, the main, I guess the main point I just want to reiterate one kind of final time here is, different tools for different jobs, and realize that oddball builds require or possibly require oddball playstyles. So not every character gets piloted the same way, and player skill is as much a factor in a build success as anything else. Doing the kind of mental calculus to track how your mana bar is dropping versus how your endurance bar is dropping versus how hard the mob is hitting, so you can swap between stances and invocations and use the various tools in your kit, do that on the fly. That is a big skill. For example, back on closed beta, when my character first hit 46, I had garbage gear. This was also, by the way, before some of the really powerful Befallen gear got added to the game, and before any of the other revamps happened. So this was in pretty close to vanilla gear at the time. Things like bronze armor, for example. But at 46, yeah, I went and did Nagafen. It was difficulty 0 Nagafen. But I was able to do it. I want to say it took 2 tries to kind of get a feel for it. But total garbage gear, was able to get through it. Had to very carefully manage my endurance bar and go between defensive and balanced very carefully to keep my endurance bar up while also managing incoming damage enough. So yeah, as chat says here, a screw can become a nail if you are determined enough and you have a hard enough hammer. Absolutely true. Kind of like how 2 plus 2 can equal 5 for very large values of 2. So yeah, it was a struggle. We got through it. It was awesome. And I was very proud of that moment. Just like that first difficulty 4 Kazakh kill, I was really proud of that. There's not a lot of people had done D4 Kazakh solo up to that point. and almost exclusively on warrior, cleric, bard setups up to that point. Like I said, now people have done all the bosses on all kinds of crazy meme builds. But yeah, we were able to get through it, so it was good. But yeah, managing those resources is is the thing you got to do on the fly, and it's a little bit of mental math that you have to just be doing constantly. And like I said, player skill as much of a part of the character as the actual stats are. So figure out how to play your character. That might be another John Madden moment. The team that plays the game better is probably going to win. Thank you, John Madden. Very insightful. All that being said, I hope that has been useful to you. One other thing I do want to add as well, just kind of a little caveat on my build, especially it's kind of a caveat of the Berserker class in general. Because people say, wouldn't Monk be better? And the answer is probably yes, actually. But I like this aesthetic, and it's good enough that it does what I want it to do. And is that if you are not in Berserker stance, Berserker just is not bringing much to the table in its current incarnation. So as part of rebalancing Berserker stance, hopefully the class has some options to not just be a stance and actually have some other features we're talking about. Like Rogue, for example, also brings a lot of damage to the table. Does not have that same stance limitation, but it does have a gear limitation. You need to have that backstab damage weapon equipped either in your main hand, your offhand, or one of your any slots. So there is that opportunity cost. If it's going into your any slot, that means you don't have an extra planar breastplate plugged in there for HP and AC and resists and whatever other stuff is in there, or whatever other big number item you've got in there. So every class choice comes with an opportunity cost. And also, every but every class is ultimately viable if you put it with the right other classes, or if you're willing to just play in some oddball way to make your oddball build work. I want your oddball build to work. I love seeing weird meme builds succeed. I play dumb meme builds on Path of Exile all the time. Most of them fail horribly. But I want your dumb meme build to work. So I hope this had value for you. I hope this gave you some food for thought on how to put your build together, and the pros and cons of an orthodox or unorthodox setup, so you can go out and play the character you want and succeed with it. So beta's almost over. We'll see you on the live server. Good luck. And hopefully your dragons and gods drop you the items you want, and hopefully your Plane of Sky items actually drop. Erelisi knows mine sure don't. My name's Tim. We'll see you next time.